At the end of World War II, tens of thousands of European children had nowhere to go. Each of these children had a painful story of loss and trauma. Good morning, I'm your host, historian Edna Friedberg, and today we're going to focus on one particular group of kids, those housed at a place called Kloster Indersdorf, a medieval monastery about 10 miles from the liberated Dachau concentration camp in Germany. I'm joined today by my colleague, Dr. Kierra Crago-Schneider. Kierra is a historian and an expert on the experiences of displaced people after World War II. Welcome, Kierra.
Thank you for having me, and thank you to the audience for watching today.
We're really excited to share this chapter of history, and viewers, please send your questions and we'll answer as many as we can during the live program. So, Kierra, to start, please tell us a bit about the children who found shelter and nurturing after the war at this particular displaced persons camp, or as we might call it today, a group home.
Yeah, the children's home established in Kloster Indersdorf was named after the town where it's located and for the cloister or monastery it was housed in. Unlike most centers for displaced persons, the children's home served a range of ethnic and religious groups, even while the U.S. government order was in place to separate centers for displaced persons based on their ethnicity. The center housed about 300 children at a time. Among its residents were Jewish boys and girls who had survived concentration camps or been placed in hiding by their parents, who were later killed during the Holocaust. No one came to reclaim these children. There were also Christian children assigned to the group home. Some were taken from their East European parents by the Nazis soon after their birth, because these parents were imprisoned in German forced labor camps. Others had been kidnapped because the Nazis deemed them either ethnically German or because they had so-called Aryan traits, like fair skin and light hair. Many of these kids spent the war in ideological schools meant to indoctrinate them into Nazi ideology.
So there's a really extreme mix and diversity of kids living there. And later we'll get to some of the tensions that having them all under one roof provoked. But all in all, we are talking about children who had spent their formative years in environments of chaos and violence. And of course, this violence was not limited to children. Roughly 11 million people are estimated to have been uprooted from their homes by the war in Europe. Some of those were able to return to their hometowns after the surrender of Germany and start over. But for those who could not, a new organization called the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration stepped in, working closely with the Allied occupation authorities in Germany. Known by its acronym UNRWA, it was established in 1943, and almost half of its budget was funded by the American government. So let's turn to one of the aid workers in particular employed by them who helped set up this particular children's home, the first to be created within the American zone of occupation in Germany. Kierra, will you please introduce us to a woman named Greta Fisher?
Yeah, Greta was an amazing person. She was born and raised in Czechoslovakia, but as a young Jewish woman, she was able to survive the Holocaust as a refugee in England. Her parents remained behind and were imprisoned in the Theresienstadt or Terezin ghetto, and both were killed during the Holocaust. Greta knew firsthand how families could be destroyed by war. She was also affected by seeing some of the millions of children evacuated to rural locations from cities in Great Britain to try to escape the danger of German bombing raids. After the war, at age 35, Greta took a job with the UNRWA Refugee Aid Organization and was stationed in Germany. Greta and other staff had to confront utter chaos in the post-war period. Food and supply shortages were rampant, and housing and other necessities were really hard to find. She was responsible for securing capable staff, which was incredibly difficult in this period, and providing for the children under her care, which was no small task. But Greta was resourceful and persistent. Her most important trait was that she had tremendous empathy for the refugee children. She was committed to creating a safe haven for hundreds of children traumatized by war, yet she admired what she called the children's rage to live.
That's such an evocative phrase, rage to live. And Greta sounds like quite a force of nature to get all of this done, and also someone with a very big heart. And we have actually quite a few photos in our museum's collection related to this place, but there are two in particular that speak to her ingenuity. Show us these pictures, please, and tell us what's so extraordinary about them.
Yeah, Greta is really resourceful in a time when being able to think on your feet was vitally important. She scavenged what she could from really unlikely sources. For example, she took a trip to the nearby liberated Dachau concentration camp to see what kind of supplies had been left behind. There she found leftover red fabric meant to make Nazi flags and blue checkered material used for Nazi officers' bedding. Greta grabbed these fabrics, and the staff at the children's home used them to create the adorable baby clothes that you see. If you look really closely, you can see a heart on the clothing of the child on the right. It is just a sweet detail that they decided to add onto the clothes.
I can only imagine how Greta and her colleagues must have gotten such a kick out of using fabric that was intended for this hateful and cruel purpose, and instead using it to clothe and adorn these cute little toddlers in a first step toward living a more normal and a more nurturing life. So it's both very practical on their part and also symbolic, almost a kind of revenge. But let's really understand just how difficult this is, because we've been throwing around these words, incredible, impressive, but what were some of the challenges and advantages of running a home for several hundred kids out of a medieval monastery?
Yeah, the main advantage was the sheer size of the monastery, which provided space and facilities to serve large numbers of people. There was a primitive gymnasium, a Baroque dining hall, and rooms that eventually housed hundreds of children at once. But it was freezing in the winter, and there was no hot water. And Greta described it as being completely unsuitable. Some of the nuns who had been evicted by the Nazis in 1938 returned to help the staff care for the children at the new center and help to overcome some of these obstacles.
I'd like to pause for a moment to acknowledge our viewers who are watching from many different places around the world. Welcome to our international viewers who are tuning in from Chile, Germany, France, and the Netherlands. And also we are very glad to have people watching from all around the US, including Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, Las Cruces, New Mexico, Maynard, Massachusetts, and Long Beach, California. We're really glad that you are with us. So Kierra, we've been looking at pictures of these very cute little chubby toddlers, but there were many, many older kids housed at Kloster Indersdorf too. Let's turn to the story of a small group of Jewish teenage boys whose ordeal began several years earlier in the small Romanian village where they had been living. And they eventually ended up under Greta's care. Who are these kids and what happened to them?
Yeah, the Kleinman and the Farkas families lived about 2 miles apart in a small Romanian village called Umbad. Martin Kleinman was the rabbi of his village and the surrounding communities. As a result of his father's role, 7-year-old Laser, who you can see circled in this picture, got to know the Farkas family, which had 2 boys close to his own age, Liepout and Erwin Farkas. Romania, as an ally of Nazi Germany, had its own fascist government. Because of its alliance, Jews living there did not fall under direct Nazi persecution until late in the war. The boys had only heard about violence against Jews happening in other parts of Europe, but in February 1944, Laser's father was seized and deported to a forced labor facility. A few months later, the Kleinmans, Farkases, and other Jewish people in the area were rounded up and sent to a ghetto. Shortly after, they were loaded into train cars and deported to the Auschwitz-Birkenau killing center.
Now, of course, for anyone who was deported to Auschwitz, this was a terrible, terrible turning point in their life. And indeed it was for the 2 Farkas brothers and for young Laser Kleinman, because it was where they were separated from their families. Kierra, what was that particular experience like for these teenagers?
And when the convoy arrived at Auschwitz, Polish prisoners unloading the trains urged the boys to pretend to be older than they were so that they would be assigned slave labor jobs rather than being murdered along with the younger children. That advice actually wound up saving their lives. Nearly everyone else in both families was immediately sent to the gas chamber and murdered. While the Farkas brothers were able to remain together throughout the Holocaust, teenage Laser was left utterly alone. Over the next year, the three boys each survived harrowing forced labor, violent death marches, and other concentration camps before recognizing each other again in the Flossenburg concentration camp in Germany.
So this was just a random stroke of luck. It's not as though they had any way of being in touch or knowing they would find each other. And as you mentioned, Laser was completely on his own. He hadn't seen the Farkas brothers, or for that matter, anyone at all who knew him since being deported from the ghetto in Romania. How were these three boys able to support each other in what actually turned out to be the final weeks before their liberation?
Yeah, they actually created their own family unit in a sense. Since these boys had been ripped from their families and homes, reuniting felt like coming back together with cousins they hadn't seen in a long time. As American troops were approaching Flossenburg, the Germans sent Laser, Erwin, Lippert, and other prisoners on a death march. Laser credits the Farkas brothers with his survival. They would carry him when he was too weak to continue to walk because those who fell behind were shot. The three boys made a run for it when the German troops were distracted while exchanging gunfire with the Americans. The boys were separated again. Laser was found in a trench by a U.S. sergeant who took him to an army hospital. He was 16 years old and he weighed only 60 pounds. Meanwhile, American troops found Lippert and Erwin in a barn and took them to an aid center. Miraculously, they were again, just months after liberation, together at Kloster Indersdorf. Laser arrived first in August 1945, completely alone and really restless. Greta pushed to bring the brothers to the group home. Laser was only able to calm down once he saw his childhood friends, Erwin and Lippert. Greta talked about how child survivors had created strong bonds with one another during the Holocaust and wanted to be together again. Aid workers fought to make this happen and allowed the kids to pick their own roommates so that they felt safer at the cloister.
You know, as a historian, I've heard so many stories of this kind of dynamic, but I can't help but look at this particular anecdote as the mother of a teenager myself, of several teenage boys, and think about the sense of panic, the feeling of abandonment and loneliness, and also just how starved and emaciated you've described Laser as being. Of course, they would find comfort in anyone who knew them at all from before, or who they felt they could trust. We have a message from a viewer named Scott who writes to say, "My wife has her grandmother's immigration paperwork from Poland. In the side notes of the document is handwritten, 'All other relatives believed to be lost in the war. Sole survivor.'" I think it's impossible to overstate how frightening and painful it would be to be a sole survivor, and yet there were many, many thousands of them. So as you've described, some children were finding some semblance of belonging at the group home, but the mix of different experiences, of different backgrounds that you described for us created some unusual challenges. Could you give us a sense of some of the conflicts that came up between the kids?
Having trauma in common could not ease the suspicion and even hatred among some groups of the children. The center's location near the town square meant that the child survivors were essentially living among their enemies and persecutors. Sometimes the town's children called out anti-Semitic chants when the Jewish kids played and lounged on the square, leading to outbreaks of fighting. Within the walls of the children's home, Greta was stunned to learn just how deeply seated the anti-Jewish sentiment ran among some of the Christian children, especially those children who ardently believed in Nazi ideology. This contributed to conflicts between these children, even within the halls of the center.
It's hard to picture the way that would have stung and the level of cruelty it would have felt like. Of course, kids struck out at each other for that. We've been talking a lot about Greta, but actually we're very fortunate that we have an oral history testimony recorded with her before the end of her life. Let's hear from Greta herself describing a very disturbing conversation that she had with a group of Polish Catholic children under her care who had been exposed to years of anti-Jewish lies and mythology.
So one evening, the conversation came that next day a group of Jewish children was to arrive. And when the girls, the Polish girls, heard that, they said, They would not stay with Jewish children in one place, that all Jews were terrible people. They were Satans, they had horns, and they were afraid they would kill them all. We told them, we are Jewish. You cannot imagine the hysteria of those children. They started crying and shouting, and it's not possible, and you're good people, and you're helping us. It took us months. It took us months every day to go over the same story, that there were Jewish people, there were Catholic people, there were all kinds of people, and there were good people and bad people, but that we were here to help them. And also helping them a little bit to see what had happened to them.
Wow. It's hard to imagine for Greta as a Jewish woman and some of her coworkers, also Jewish, what that would be like to hear that from kids they're caring for. Especially, I'm struck because many of the sentiments that she's describing actually predate the Nazi era or Nazi ideology, the idea of Jews having horns or the lie about Jews as killers of Christian children stem much, much older from anti-Semitism, from Jew hatred in the church. But in terms of where some of these attitudes came from, Kierra, what is Greta referring to? What happened to some of these kids specifically?
Yeah, one of the groups of children that ended up in Kloster Indersdorf were those who had been kidnapped or handed over by parents under false pretenses to the Germans. They had been exposed to a barrage of hateful ideology. Some heard it on a daily basis, such as the boy named Alexander Pecha, who is wearing the white turtleneck here. After his parents were murdered in Soviet Ukraine, the boy lived for years with an SS doctor who brought him to Northeast Germany. Alexander served as a mascot and was taught the Nazi salute as well as Nazi songs and poems. After the doctor abandoned him at the end of the war, he eventually found a home at the monastery. The 9-year-old believed himself to be a good Nazi. He greeted people with the words Heil Hitler and a Hitler salute. And as you can imagine, some Jewish teens at the group home were horrified and attacked him in response. Greta had a lot of empathy for Alexander and took the time to teach him the meaning of his actions. Greta tried to help the children first learn to coexist and eventually to try and understand each other.
She sounds like an incredibly patient person. And from what you described of Alexander's journey, those are behaviors that probably got him a lot of praise and protected him during the war. And now, of course, they landed very differently. What were some of the more specific ways that the staff at Kloster Indersdorf tried to meet the children's complex needs?
Above all, they tried to make the children feel welcome, loved, and cared for. The staff became essentially surrogate parents. Basic things like ensuring that there was always enough food for children who had been starved was a top priority. Some kids continued to put food into their pockets, especially bread, at the end of a meal, but staff assured them that there would always be more food. One staff member wrote about taking care of 25 to 30 babies who demanded to be fed and comforted, all while trying to catch a few hours of sleep in between. These were children who had been deprived of everything, including love. So the staff aimed to create moments when they could run and play and capture a glimpse of an ordinary childhood. Some of the children felt deeply disconnected from their own culture. So Greta offered classes in the children's native languages and encouraged them to learn about their cultures. And at a time when society often told people who had experienced trauma to get on with their lives and just forget, Greta believed that people needed to acknowledge and talk through their painful experiences.
Giving the children that space, though, to process, to share, also took a toll on the adults there who had, of course, their own wartime experiences and their own losses. Let's hear from Greta again, this time describing what it was like for her and the other staff members to hear the kids struggling with their trauma.
Millions of stories, unrepeatable sometimes, and stories which the human mind doesn't want to accept, We cried many times with the children, but you don't help children when you cry with them, We had to be very brave ourselves. In many instances, we would talk amongst ourselves too, but in a way also we were somewhat numb. We didn't permit ourselves really to feel in some ways because it was too terrible. We wouldn't have been able to do our jobs. And the other thing which helped us, that we were so busy. Every minute of the day we were asked to be there for somebody. Was it for the baby? Was it for the tweenies? Was it for the big children? Was it to look for material? Was it to look for food? Was it to fill out requisition? Every minute of the day.
It's also, listening to that, I'm reminded that you said that Greta's own parents were murdered. So although she's an adult, she too is orphaned and trying to, I'm sure, process that loss. We have a question from a viewer named Jason asking, what doctor was that young man? He means the little boy Alexander. What was he with? The doctor's last name was Bruns, Bruhns. So Dr. Bruns, who took him from Ukraine and then eventually abandoned him near the end of the war in Germany. Thank you for that, Jason. Kierra, Greta and the other aid workers, as busy as they were, as she has described, with running the place, with providing emotional support, they also devoted themselves to the much bigger job of trying to track down any surviving relatives who might claim some of these children. What can you tell us about those efforts?
The center worked with an American photographer named Charles Hawker to take pictures like this of the children in the hopes that somebody might recognize a family member or maybe a neighbor would recognize someone and claim them. Sometimes the names were made up because the children were just too young to know their own names, and the Germans destroyed records as they fled. Polish orphan Sofia Karpuk had a particular affection for a baby that arrived without a name. The 10-year-old Sofia referred to her as little fish in Polish because of the way that she laid flat in the crib. So when it came time to give the baby a name, she was called Sophie Rybki. The first name was in honor of Sophia, and the last name was Polish for little fish.
That's so sweet, the pictures, and also the idea that one child, in a way, would sort of adopt the other. They became each other's surrogate families. Kierra, we have another viewer question. Someone named Terry has written in to ask, what happened to those under age 18 when they had no one to return to?
First, the aid workers tried to find family placements in other countries for the children who were not claimed. And many Jewish children could not return to their hometowns where anti-Jewish sentiment was dangerous, violent, and rampant. So they remained longer. For young children who had no one to live with, they sometimes spent years in group homes. Some Jewish teenagers had the opportunity to move to teen-led communities, almost like a summer camp, where they learned to care for themselves, grew their own food, prepared for their future lives in the Jewish state. If we go back to the stories of Laser and the Farkas brothers, they never found permanent homes. Laser eventually moved to London, bidding an emotional goodbye to the Farkas brothers, who eventually moved to the United States, with Erwin moving in with an extended family in New York. Years later, they all reunited as adults. But it was not easy to begin again. Many countries, including the United States, had restrictive immigration quotas, and displaced persons, children and adults alike, remained homeless for years.
Yeah, this is part of a much broader phenomenon of closed doors and wandering. Decades later, reflecting back, Greta remembered the response to these children who so desperately wanted to find permanent homes. Let's hear from her again.
Nobody really wanted the children, and nobody really wanted the refugees. They were, the world did not believe the stories. I went on, a part of my family was in London, and the first time I went to London, I was telling my friends, my family, all the things I had seen, and nobody wanted to believe. I mean, my family believed me, but friends, it can't be that human beings can do the same to other human beings. It's impossible.
As a DP historian, or somebody who studies displaced persons, what Greta says really resonates with me because people could not imagine the horrors these children had faced during the Holocaust. There was also a sense that if the stories were actually true, survivors would be so traumatized that they would not make good citizens.
So there are a lot of assumptions, feelings of guilt, all kinds of factors at play here, in addition to the legalities. But Greta remained really, really dedicated. She agreed to accompany a group of the children under her care who immigrated to Canada in late 1947. And she continued her career in Canada, working as a social worker before eventually moving to Israel, where she lived for the rest of her life. But she always thought of the children from Kloster Indersdorf as her own. We have heard from quite a few Greta Fisher fans, Kierra. I'd like to share comments from a number of them. Anne writes in to say, what a sad but wonderful story of taking care of mankind. Remarkable, really. And Angie writes to observe what a wonderful legacy that Greta left. Becky and Donna have asked us about the site of this group home at Kloster Indersdorf. They wondered if it's still there, if it has been recognized for its place as a place of healing for children after the war. What can you tell us about it?
Today, the townspeople are very proud to claim the site and Greta and the others who provided refuge for the children after World War II. The nuns reclaimed the building itself and used it as a school for decades, but eventually the order left. Today, it's both a school and a museum. The town of Indersdorf has been the site for quite a few reunions of the surviving children and their families. And in the town of Dachau, there is actually a school now named for Greta.
Very, very appropriate and good to know that, that if these walls could talk kind of story, that they do continue to speak to the townspeople and to people who come there. Kierra, we have another viewer question. A woman named Jane writes in to ask, do you know if any of the children were ever able to locate family through genealogy or ancestry sites are available today? And Jane, I can tell you in particular actually about a project that we had at our museum. In 2011, the Holocaust Museum embarked on a project to try to learn what became of many displaced children across Europe, including Greta's so-called lost children. Kierra, could you fill in more detail about the project, which we called Remember Me?
So the museum aimed to make contact with the children or to reach family or friends who could tell us about what happened to them. They created a crowdsourcing website and worked with the media and other experts to track down these individuals. Staff of our Survivor and Victim Center conducted interviews with survivors, with the family members of those who were not alive to speak for themselves. While it's been meaningful for our institution to learn the stories of these children, we were also able to conduct research and help some of them gain a fuller picture of their childhoods many decades later. One example is a girl named Mariana Pass, who later went by Miriam. She saw her picture on the website and contacted the museum. Miriam said she was grateful to learn parts of her story that her mother had never filled in after the war. She had little information about her early years, and we were able to share records related to her mother's experience. And we learned after the war that her mother had tuberculosis and was too ill to reclaim her daughter for several years, until Miriam was 5, in fact. We also discovered Miriam's father's name and helped her connect with family members that she didn't even know about. In the last stage of her life, Miriam said she felt solace in learning so many answers to the questions she had been carrying. We're happy to help her before she died.
I think it's a really poignant reminder that we talk about history in sort of these big, broad sweeps, but at the end of the day, it's about real people's lives, real people's home dynamics, their psychology, their identity. And there's something incredibly powerful about looking at these photos of the kids holding the slates with their name. They're staring straight at you saying, can you help me figure out who I am? It's sort of the inverse of missing children's signs or posters that we see today. So, Kierra, I know there's so much more to this story, but it's been such a pleasure to pay tribute to Greta Fisher, to learn about some of the children in her care. And we know that these relationships are just symbolic of so many others. So thank you for being with us.
It was a pleasure getting to share some of the post-war stories of these child survivors.
They are really very moving. We'd also like to pay credit to historian Anna Andlauer, who has conducted research on this topic, and to our colleagues here at the museum in our Survivors and Victims Resource Center, whose work inspired this program. But as we close, I'd like to turn to you, our viewers, with a plea for help and to return to some of the children whose stories we still don't know. They may eventually have become parents themselves or grandparents or great-grandparents, and we'd like your help. If you recognize a face here, if you can share it with anyone you know, share this show with people you know, please reach out to us through social media to let us know if someone looks familiar or a name rings a bell. But until then, as always, thank you so much for watching, and we look forward to seeing you again in the new year. Bye-bye.